Hey everybody, so this is your first lecture. We're going to go through the basics of what sociology is. Let me pull up my slideshow. If you haven't already, if you haven't watched my video on how to handle lecture in class, please stop and go through that real quick because it'll answer some of your questions about what you're supposed to be doing with these lectures. Otherwise, this should be a good overview of what sociology is and give you an idea of how class is going to go. So let's start by talking about what is sociology. So sociology is four different things. First, it's the study of society. It's the study of me, it's the study of you. It's trying to understand why do people do what they do, why do people behave the way they behave, and how can we bring some sort of science to this exploration of human behavior. Two, so there's three things that need to come into play for sociology to be sociology. The first is what we call empirical investigation, which basically means going out and doing research, which I'm going to talk about in another lecture, how research is conducted. Data analysis, so once you have your research, analyzing your data, and some sort of theory that's brought in to help guide you and explore social life. I'm going to talk about those in the next lecture. For now, I just want you to know there are four components to sociology and three things that make sociology sociology. The second is it's the influence of what we call the historical and the biographical. So sociology is looking at not just what is happening right now at this moment in time, but what has led up to this moment that got us to this place. So for example, I'm recording this in April of 2020, and I am sitting at home because everybody is being told to be at home because of the coronavirus. So if we look at the coronavirus as itself as like a social phenomenon, besides being an illness, we can think about what has led us to this moment. So what made things so bad that we all had to stay home? And we can start to peel apart the layers of that. What warning signs were happening a year ago? What kinds of things did our government have or not have in place to deal with a pandemic response? Why were certain parts of government shut down? So for example, when President Obama transitioned to our current president, he kind of left a whole bunch of stuff in line for people to handle. Like it was kind of like briefings of what's going to happen, how you can handle things, what to expect, basically like a manual of how to run the government. When the current administration came in, one of the first things they got rid of was the Office of Pandemic Response. So as a social scientist, as a sociologist, I would go back to that point in history and say, okay, so what led them to making those decisions? And then how did those decisions affect what is happening to us right now? Because we don't just have illness, but we have economic issues. We have public mental health issues with people being asked to stay home. We have all sorts of stuff happening. So I would trace the steps back. So that's what I'm talking about when I say connect societal influence on the historical and the biographical. And then last, sociology, you just heard me say this, is what's considered a social science. So a social science is any discipline that examines the human or social world. Sociology, psychology, history, economics, women's studies, African American studies, Latino, Latinx studies, all of that stuff falls into social science. So I want you to take a minute, set your watch if you need to, pause me, and I want you to start to make a list of everything that you think makes up a society. So I've given you some pictures here to maybe start getting you thinking. I apologize, my face is covering up the protest and the Black Lives Matter picture that I have. I want you to take a second and just start listing all of the things that make up a society. Everything you can possibly think of. No right or wrong answer, just some stuff off of the top of your head. And I will wait. And if you need a awesome pause for me so that I'm kind of looking at you in a fun way while you wait. Okay, are you done? Okay, so hopefully you have a really kind of beefy list of stuff that makes up a society. I want you to think about one thing. So down here, up here in the corner, I have these people dancing and I have this kind of parade mask happening. This is to represent culture. In my mind, when I was making this, it was to represent culture. So when we think about everything that makes up a culture, just try for a second and think of everything that somebody could possibly need to make up a culture, or what makes up your culture, right? So we're talking about things like the food you eat, the language you speak. People tend to not remember to mention food in culture, which blows my mind because, like, to me, that's the most important part. The language you speak, the religion you practice, the way you dress, the way you celebrate holidays, or maybe just the way you celebrate birthdays or special events or special occasions. All of that stuff makes up a culture. It would be very difficult to have a culture without any of them. What I want you to think about when we think about what makes up a society is that these things don't really exist independently of each other. So, for example, if I'm going to talk about crime, so I have this guy down here representing crime. If I'm going to address crime, it would be very difficult for me to address crime and not talk about something like race or social class or gender, right? Because the majority of people who are locked up in the United States are African American and Latino men who come from lower income households, right? So those three things right there tell me that I can't look at crime without addressing those three topics. And that's what we're going to get at when we talk about what is sociology, what kind of stuff makes up a society. It's all of these things together that kind of make up the parts. So the other thing I want you to be clear on are things called social factors. Social factors are anything that affect us or direct our lifestyle. I have a few examples here. This is by no means exhaustive. This is just a few things to get you thinking about what could be a social factor. These are kind of the basics. The first is religion. I don't have these in any specific order, with the exception of religion, because religion, whether we like it or not, affects us. Even if you don't believe in something, even if you don't subscribe to a certain religion, even if you don't want it to affect you, it's going to affect you. And I'll give you two really basic examples. Number one, people running for office, right? It'd be really difficult for somebody to run for office and say, I don't believe in God. I don't think it happens. I think when you die, you're dead. I don't think any of it's real. There's nothing spiritual. Life is just life. That would be really, really difficult, right? Two, and this is a bit of a rant. I'm not going to apologize for it. Two, Christmas. If you do not practice Christmas, if you don't believe in Christmas, if it's not your holiday, if it's not your jam, if you don't like it, you have a really, really hard time escaping it, right? My beloved stores that I like are Target and Lowe's. And I walked into Lowe's in September this year, and they had like Halloween got maybe a corner on a table, which I think is awful to begin with because I love Halloween. Halloween got a little corner on a table. Christmas was like this, just this massive blown up thing in September, right? So if I don't believe in Christmas, if I don't believe in Jesus, if I'm not Christian, if it's not for me, I am going to have to walk through it to get to my garden center or get to my ant killer or whatever it is I'm trying to do that day. Okay. That's religion. Religion has an impact on us, whether we like it or not. And in our society, in a society, I should say, whatever the dominant religion is going to have an impact on people. Second, race, class, gender, ethnicity. You'll hear me talk about this more when we talk about each one separately, but race, class, and gender and ethnicity affect us. It's how we break people off into groups. Sexuality, whether you're gay, straight, anywhere on the spectrum. Your family life and how you've been raised affects you tremendously, and we're going to address that in class. The way you look is going to affect or direct your lifestyle. Your economic status, so not just how much money you make, but where you're situated in society. So, for example, you could be a social worker making $30,000 to $40,000 a year, but you also have a master's degree. So that master's degree is going to put you ahead of other people in society because you have that extra education. And that's what economic status is getting at. It's not just how much money you make, but it's how you're contributing to a society with that money or with that status. Your education, and then et cetera, et cetera. All right. So one of the main things I want you to take away from today is two of the main things is the sociological imagination. So one of the main things I want you to take away from today is the sociological imagination. So this was started by a guy named C. Wright Mills. If you watch The Office, I think in this picture right here, he looks a little like Dwight from The Office. Um, so the sociological imagination tries to understand the links between our history, our biography, and ourselves. So this is what I was talking about with trying to look past what is happening right now or how something affects you right now and look at it in the big picture. And to understand that for a society to, according to the sociological imagination, for a society to keep going, we have to understand our history. We have to understand how our history impacts our own biographies and how that then informs our behavior, why we do the things that we do. Also, it's asking us to think ourselves away from what we call a daily routine. So here's a challenge for you. After you're done watching this and you go to brush your teeth, at whatever point today you brush your teeth, try using the opposite hand. So if you're right-handed, brush with your left hand and see how you feel. That is an example of thinking yourself away. It's taking something that you know to be true and flipping it on its head. And a really basic way is just change up the way you brush your teeth and then think about how you can apply that to bigger stuff in your life, stuff that you know to be true. Maybe that thing is your religion. Maybe that thing is your feelings about relationships. It could be anything, but think about something that you are absolutely certain is true and then think around it. Think yourself away from it and say, okay, if I know that is true, how would someone else who maybe didn't believe in it approach it? That's what Mills is asking us to do. The few things he's attempting. First is he's saying that we can understand our own experiences by understanding who influenced us. So people like your parents, the people who raised you, maybe a coach or a teacher or somebody who was really impactful to you, either growing up or right now. If you look at that person, you can kind of understand your own behavior, why you do the things you do. Maybe for some of you, it's as you get older, you start to realize that maybe you sound more and more like your mothers, or your fathers, or whomever had a hand in raising you. But try and understand your own experience by looking at who has influenced you. Second, so we're getting back to brushing our teeth. Make the familiar strange. So challenge what we think we know. Brush your teeth with the opposite hand. If you watch a certain news channel, maybe flip to the one that you think is the complete opposite of what you enjoy. Challenge what you think you know. Don't go to fake news, though. We'll talk about that in another lecture. Contemporary society. So think about the way that what is happening right now in 2020 has been informed by what has happened in the past. So I'll give you the example of we'll take the example of Black Lives Matter. If you're not familiar with Black Lives Matter, please pause me, take a few minutes, Google it, understand what it is. But Black Lives Matter, you have a group of people who are very, very, very much building on what has happened to Black and African American people in the United States in the past and how that has led us up to this moment where we're talking about police brutality and kind of a decrease in the acknowledgement of the lives of African American and Black people, right? How has what has happened in the past led us to this moment? In other words, what has happened to a group of people that would make them feel like the only way to start to move forward or to get the microphone or to get people's attention or to get out what they're feeling is to start this movement, right? It's not very hard for us to figure out what has led up to this moment. But that's what the sociological imagination is asking us to do. Number 4, understanding your sociological imagination helps us to see how social factors influence ourselves and our fellow humans. So once we can start to make the familiar strange, take things apart, remove layers of stuff, we can start to see why people do the things that they do. People's behavior is very rarely just on the surface, right? Like you're very rarely just a bad person. If you've ever seen a villain origin story, which, side note, I am very much hoping that someday in The Little Mermaid, they do an Ursula villain origin story. I would love to watch that. I would watch that all day long. But if you've ever seen a villain origin story or just any sort of building on what led someone to do bad things. I know the movie Joker is big right now, and that sort of builds on how he became Joker. That's what the sociological imagination is asking us to do, starting to peel things apart. I want you to think of the sociological imagination like an onion. That when you start to peel an onion, you get a lot of layers. And maybe you cry and you have that problem too, but once you start to peel back an onion, you get a lot of layers. The same thing we're asking you to do when you think about society, to get past that surface area, that surface layer, and start to peel it back and see what makes people behave the way they do, what has led to this moment in their life. A couple ways we're going to talk about this. You have a reading on Canvas called The Promise of the Sociological Imagination. And the reading is going to talk about what are called public issues versus personal troubles. So a personal trouble is something that is very specific to an individual, meaning that it's something that probably only affects you. So an example I gave is you fail an exam because you were up late playing Halo. I don't know what cool video games are out there. I play Animal Crossing, Zelda, Mario, Donkey Kong, Rayman, like anything my Nintendo Switch offers, I'll probably play it. But I don't know cool video games, so don't make fun of me there. But the point is, you were up late building your awesome Animal Crossing island, and you didn't study, right? That's a personal trouble. We all know people who think that their personal trouble is everybody's personal trouble. That's not the case. This is a personal trouble. What we're interested in sociology are public issues. So these are things that affect lots of people. So here's an example. You fail an exam because you were one of the primary breadwinners in your house, and you were at work until midnight the night before as part of your 60-hour work week. This transcends just you as the individual, because the question then becomes, why do you have to work so much to go to school? Well, school is expensive. I don't have to tell you guys that. College is expensive. Rent is expensive. Life is expensive, right? Why is college so expensive? What is happening in systems that has made education as expensive as it is? What's going on in our economy that makes rent as expensive as it is? These are all things that transcend just the individual because they're going to affect a lot of people. Now, you can't do this with a partner, but if we were in a classroom, I would have you do this with a partner. But what I do want you to do is I want you to take a second, pause me, and answer these questions. Where were you born? What year? Who are or were your parents? What was life like growing up? What is your first memory in general? What is your first memory of something historic? And just sort of think through those things. And then I'll kind of explain to you when you come back what it means. So take a minute, try and answer those questions. You can answer them in your mind. You can write them down, whatever you want to do. Here is a flattering way to pause me. Okay. So hopefully by now you've answered these questions. I hope that was a flattering way to pause me. I can't really see while I'm doing this. So what I want you to think about with these 5 questions is how have your answers to these questions led you to who you are right now or where you're at right now? Because basically this is your biography, right? We're talking about our history, our biography, and ourselves. How have these things led you to where you are now, and how does that influence your behavior? All right, last, you can ignore the other slide. Last thing I want to talk about are our founding sociologists. So we have Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte is the founding father of sociology. So if you ever are in a trivia night and somebody says, hey, who's the founding father of sociology? It's Auguste Comte, 1838, named sociology, wanted to come up with a way to understand the social world in the same way that people were understanding the scientific world, so like chemistry and physics and all of that. He wanted to do the same thing, but he wanted to do it through understanding behavior, why people behave the way they do. Emile Durkheim, he's considered one of our founding fathers because he was one of the first to create what we're going to call functionalist theory, which I'm going to talk about in another lecture. But basically, he was one of the first to say that all parts of a society need to be functioning in order for a society to move forward, meaning that all parts of a society are necessary, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it's there. He also created organic solidarity. This means that various parts of a society need to be functioning in order for society to become integrated. I'll talk more about him in the next lecture on social theory. What he's probably the most known for in social science is his book Suicide. So this was published in 1897. He talked about a few things in this. The first is anime, not the awesome animation. But anomie is a place where you lose your social norms. So whatever is holding your behavior in place, you say, I don't care anymore. This is the F it approach to life, and not like in the cool kind of flip it way. This is a very serious, I don't care anymore. Whatever norms are placed on me in society does not affect me at this point. I'm going to do whatever I want. So this is why people murder. This is why people commit things like sexual assault or harassment. This is also why people commit suicide, because suicide is kind of the ultimate leap into saying these norms don't apply to me anymore, because killing ourselves is that ultimate sort of state of anomie, thinking that norms don't apply to you. So for Durkheim, he connected this idea of anomie with people committing suicide. And at the time, in 1897, it was absolutely mind-blowing that people would consider suicide to be the way out, and that they were experiencing this, what he called normlessness in that moment. We also can apply this now, right? If you've read any studies of suicide, if you've read any studies of people just sort of giving up and having no more connection to norms or to social life, Suicide, the book, still applies to that over 100 years later. Karl Marx is probably the person you'll know the most throughout the men that I'm talking about. I like to think of him as the guy with the most awesome beard, because doesn't it look like there's like birds or something that should be living in there at some point? Like a nest should be in there. He was mostly concerned with capitalism. So Karl Marx is known for trying to understand social class and class systems. His book that I want you to have some reference on is a book called Capital, mostly because it continues to be, I'm recording this in 2020, it continues to be the most cited book published before 1950. And it talks about how what is happening, I wrote this in 2018, ignore that. There might be some mistakes as we go through these slides, sorry. So it's talking about how can we equate what is happening now, 2020, to this history. So Capital was published in 1867. And basically what he said was that capitalism is a force that exploits people's labor, or in other words, capitalism needs unpaid or cheap labor, and unpaid or low-waged work, because it's so cheap. You don't have to pay people a lot, right? Now, for us in 2020, or whenever you're watching this in the future, hopefully if it's super far in the future, I'm a hologram, but we'll see. For us watching this right now, that may not seem that mind-blowing, but in 1867, this was a complete just moment for people. This idea that capitalism could have a downfall and that we could be exploiting people's labor, and somebody calling that out on top of it was a huge deal. And it's still cited now because it still applies now, right? We still have instances of people who are working in cheap, free or cheap labor, or being exploited because of their labor, or aren't getting paid enough, or aren't making a living wage, or if they are making a living wage, it's not enough to, go beyond whatever a basic dollar an hour is. So this is why Capital continues to be referenced. Max Weber, I know it looks like Weber, but it's pronounced Weber, is most known for a book called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. So he's another kind of founding father for us. He wanted to look at the impact of religion. So in 1905, he wrote The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And kind of the premise of the whole book is in its title. So you have the Protestant ethic, which is the Protestant work ethic, which at the time was make a lot of money, don't spend it, don't give it away. I'm assuming slip it under your mattress because it was 1905. I don't know. The Depression hadn't happened yet. But hoard as much money as you can, because the more money you make, the more you're going to appease God. The happier God is going to be with you. This was revolutionary at the time because people weren't exactly calling out capitalism in that sense. The spirit of capitalism is the part about appeasing God, right? That the more money you have, the more money you make, the happier God is going to be. All right, Harriet Martineau. Harriet Martineau is one of my favorites. Harriet Martineau was a British writer. She wrote a book called Society in America in 1837. If you like this stuff, I think all the books I've mentioned you can get on, for sure, Amazon Kindle. And I think most of them are free. Once a book has hit 100 years old, they tend to be free on Kindles. So she wrote Society in America in 1837. And basically, Martineau came to the US as a British writer, came to the US to explore this new world that everybody was just completely gaga over. And she had some thoughts. She had some feelings. She had some opinions. And one of them was that, yes, America has all this available land and all of this space, but we're not treating people that great. And she was very critical of the way that people of color and women were being treated in the US. Now, in 1837, for a British woman, to come to the US and make these claims was like, people were just clutching their pearls and, oh my goodness, why would she do this? And, if it were now, there'd be like a million troll comments on YouTube, like just calling her every awful name in the book. People were mad, but she was right. She was kind of right. So we toss her in as a founding sociologist because she was one of the first people to perform what we call an ethnography, which I'll get to more next time, but basically observing social life and reporting back what she saw. She also, there it is. She creates a detailed ethnography of the US. All right, last, W.E.B. Du Bois. Some want to say Du Bois. I've heard a whole bunch of debate about this. I've read that he preferred Du Bois. So that's what we're going to go with. First significant African-American sociologist came up with this term called double consciousness. Basically, he said that all African-Americans have to see themselves in two ways, not just in the way they see themselves, so not just through their own eyes, but also through the eyes of society, and not just any society, but a society that degrades them. So not just seeing yourself the way you feel you are, but being constantly aware that other people are looking at you and judging you just simply based off the color of your skin. This is double consciousness, and this is what Du Bois was getting at. He also said that this is what led us to have negative self-identities for people in Black and African-American communities. Okay, that's lecture number 1. Hope you hung in there. Hope that I made you feel like this is all going to be okay. I will see you all in a little bit for your next lecture. Bye.